All right. Good morning. I'd like to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Xiaoxi Gu, our friend, colleague, co-author. Xiaoxi is currently an assistant professor at the School of Behavioral and Brain Sciences at the University of Texas, Dallas, where she's been since 2015. Xiaoxi got her PhD in 2011 at the Icahn School of Medicine in New York under the direction of Jim Fan and Patrick Hoff. In 2011, she came here to the VTCRI for a postdoc with Reed Montague. And then she moved in 2012 to London to continue her postdoc, or well, officially it was a new postdoc, with Reed at the Wellcome Trust Center for Neuroimaging, University College, London. From there, she moved to her current position, establishing her lab, the Computational Psychiatry Unit at UT Dallas. Briefly about Xiaoxi's work, which has remarkable depth and breadth at such an early stage. Xiaoxi uses fMRI and computational models to probe the neural substrates of mental states and decision-making and their interactions in healthy and diseased humans. Much of her early work focused on the neural underpinnings of interoceptive and emotional processes such as pain and empathy. Here in Roanoke and then in London, she focused on using computational models to understand decision-making. For example, she helped elucidate the impact of beliefs on neural responses to prediction errors in an economic decision task in sated and unsated smokers. In another study, she uncovered dissociable roles for the insulin ventral medial prefrontal cortex in social decision-making by using computational models of behavior to study a group of patients with insular frontal lesions. Today, Xiaoxi will tell us about further progress she is making using computational models to uncover the neural underpinnings of social decision-making.
Okay, thank you, Terry. Okay, thank you, everyone. It's always a great pleasure for me to come back here and visit. So I was here from 2011 to 12. Really during the early year of VTCRI, and we had a lot of fun at the time. And so today I'm going to talk about partially some old studies, but also some new studies, some new results that we have just got from my new lab right now at UT Dallas. Okay. So I'm mostly interested in social norms, right? So we know that norms are these informal or formal definitions, understandings that govern behavior or how people behave in a society or group, right? So a lot of the social norms are defined by our social identities, such as gender or race or ethnicity or nationality. So I like to use this example, but it'll be inappropriate for anyone else who is not an Asian female to say, to talk about this example, but it's fine since I am. So I am actually from a culture where females have to sit like this in public, right? So if you spread out your legs, you're really considered, you're not considered a decent woman, okay? But whereas, after I get to the United States and also a little bit in Europe, where there's much more female empowerment. So females can sit the way as males do, which I think is great. So as a academic, we all have to move around, and you probably have all lived under different cultures and different social norms. And as human beings, we have to quickly adapt, right? So for example, if I grew up in China, I always sit like this, but when I come to the United States, there's so much freedom, why don't I go ahead and enjoy it? So I would sit like this, okay? Anyway, and another example, since Reed is not here, is I can show this. So even moving from the US to London, that was, again, quite a big cultural difference for me, right? So you would have someone like Carl Friston, who always dresses up in very formal clothes, even at a very casual lunch meeting, let's say, Or you could have someone like Reed wearing t-shirt and jeans, even when he's giving a TED Talk, right? But we know he has nice suits too. Just doesn't like to wear them. So these are, again, different social norms, even under the same, let's say, Western cultural system. Okay. So the question for us is, how do we adapt or learn to adjust our behavior to social norms? Okay. So in neuroscience, especially human decision neuroscience, a lot of the studies have focused on what I call the passive responses to norms, such as norm compliance. So how do we basically follow what the society wants us to do? Or how do we follow other individuals? Okay. So here's one nice example done by Ernest Firth's group, published in Neuron, in 2007, where they showed that when participants comply to an imposed social norm, you would have these regions show up. So not surprisingly, dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, ventral lateral prefrontal cortex, and you have lateral orbital frontal cortex and caudate. Okay, so a bunch of regions. And I want to also cite a study that from Pro and Brooks' lab. So this is the lead author is Dongyo here, where they showed that peer influence can also act as a very powerful sort of social norm. And as individuals, we conform to that external influence, right? So basically, if your partner or the group's behavior is more risky, my behavior will tend to become more risky. Versus if I'm in a group where everyone behaves in a safe way, then my behavior would also become safer, okay? And they found that this VMPFC activation nicely encoded what's called OC, or other conferred utility. Okay, so I want to take a step back and think, how do we actually do that, right? So do we just simply observe and just copy other people? And this is a opinion paper written by Terry and Reed actually a long time ago, 2010, where they proposed this hypothetical model in which the individual here is show, the individual's belief or behavior is shown in red, and the group behavior or belief is shown in green, right? So this would be what we call as social norm, right? And it's quite peaky because group norms are usually, based on many years or even generations of data points. So we have very, very good confidence on it, okay? So my current estimate, or the individual estimate, is usually not exactly the same as the group norm, right? In this situation, you have an error, or what we call norm prediction error. Then what you should do is adapt your own estimate to move towards the social norm, right? So when you adjust your behavior to match the social norm, then that error signal disappears. So this is also very similar to basically learning in general, learning mechanisms in general. We have to adjust our behavior to minimize these mismatched signals. Okay, so based on this model, Reed's group has done a lot of work to uncover the neural mechanisms of norm learning. Okay, so this is what we call norm prediction errors. This is the first paper done by Tin from 2013, which she showed the VMPFC and bilateral insula are involved in encoding norm prediction errors. Okay, and we replicated this in London. So this is part data from the large London social exchange study in healthy controls and borderline patients. So this is just healthy controls. And we pretty much show almost exactly the same patterns, right? So we have VMPFC and bilateral insula, okay?
Real quickly.
Sure.
To me, this one on the right looks a lot different. So I see some points that are the same, but not really very many. But that to you looks the same?
Well, so I think the patterns in VMPFC, this cluster here, and the insula, they are almost the
There's
same.
a lot here that's just not even replicated. So
Yeah, Yeah, so this is a...
So what qualifies for replication?
Sure, yeah. So basically, we can't say anything about the magnitude at the moment because the sample size is different between the two studies. But for, I think this one has a much bigger sample size. And yeah, but the pattern for VMPFC and insular is similar between the two studies. Okay. And the reason I want to focus on VMPFC and insular is because there are actually a lot of other studies that also show their activation or involvement in similar processes. And for me, the question was, how do we know which region is doing what exactly, right? Because we know fMRI studies are correlational. And to answer that, or at least to partially address this problem, we used a human lesion model. So this is in collaboration with Xin-Chao Wang, who's sitting right here, who just flew this morning from Boston. And we had patients with a focal brain tumor that underwent brain surgery. So the nice thing about these patients is that their lesions are very, very focal, right? So you can see here, so this is my group of insular patients. And if I overlay the lesions, you can see that the part that has the greatest overlay between patients is the anterior insula, which is the part that showed up in fMRI studies. And then here I also have the VMPFC, right? So the red denotes this is the most consistent lesion across subjects. Okay? So this is a really old sort of traditional approach in neuropsychology, where if you can lesion one part and show two different body parts, two different brain parts, and then you can show that there's different deficits associated with each lesion, then we call that a double dissociation, right? So it's an old approach in psychology. Okay, and the experimental probe for norm learning is actually something very, very simple. Okay, so I'm sure most of you are familiar with this paradigm here, the ultimatum game, right? In which we have the proposer offers an offer split. So let's say I offer you $6 out of 20, and the responder's task is to say yes or no to this offer, right? So if I say no, then we both get 0. But if I say yes, we just split the way it is, okay? So basically what the responder here needs to process is what I think is fair or what I think I can expect from this person, okay? And in our games, the participants are usually the responder. But if I change this scenario a little bit, okay, if I now ask you to play this game not with one person, but with a group of individuals, okay, that really changes the dynamics of the games, right? Because I don't only need to, I don't just think about what each person does in this group. I have to think of them as a group. So maybe, if I'm playing with people here at VTC, would be very different from if I play this game with people in Dallas, let's say. I think people here are a little nicer. Then maybe I'll expect a higher average offer in general, okay? Okay, so that's the idea. Okay, so basically we sort of adapt the ultimatum game so that each partner, each subject plays with a group of individuals, simulated individuals in the game. Okay. And this is what we found. This is the basic rejection rate by offer size. Okay. So we have 4 groups here. So NC is normal controls, and this is brain damage controls. So these are patients with damage anywhere else but not insular or VMPFC. So they're actually mostly in the temporal parietal lobe. And we also have patients with insular lesions and patients with VMPFC lesions. Okay? So the most striking effect here is this green line, right? So this is my VMPFC group. Okay? And so the x-axis is the offer size. So from 1 to 10, 1 being the most unfair and 10 being the most fair. Okay? And the y-axis is rejection rate. So normally you would expect something like this, right? When the offer is the most unfair, I would reject most of them. But as the offer becomes more fair, I start to accept more and more and more. Okay, so it's a downward curve. But in VMPFC patients, you see that this curve is almost flat. Okay, right? So they don't really know. They reject at about the same rate across all offer sizes, right? So if you give me 1, I don't think that's a big deal. I still accept. But if you give me, 8 or 9 or 10, I accept at about the same rate, which is not normal. So this really tells us that VMPFC patients have problems in valuation to start with. Yes?
I have a question. So in this experiment, was there a gradual change in the rule, or it was an abrupt change from 1 to 10? Say,
It's,
is there a sensitivity
yeah.
to a gradient or a sensitivity to
Yeah.
the lack of learning?
It's actually randomized. So the offers are randomized across the trials, across all subjects.
Did you say, I may have misjudged it, at the beginning that these patients are all tumors or different kinds of lesions?
They're all tumors.
They're all tumors?
Yeah.
And the control lesion
Mhm.
injury ones are also tumors?
Yes.
Not other types of
Yes.
injuries?
Yeah.
Okay, and so then if they're all tumors, are they, they're put into this group by virtue of the location of the tumor
Mhm.
and the size to a degree? So I guess really my question is, how far along are these people?
Yeah.
Are these glioblastomas? Are
Yeah.
these secondary metastatic
Uh-huh.
glioblastoma?
Yeah.
And so how far along are they in the disease or from
Yeah.
diagnosis?
Yeah,
Are
great.
they variable?
Uh-huh. So Xin-Chao can probably answer this question better than me. They are all glioma patients. Yeah, so glioma, and we test them at least 3 months post-surgery. Right? So they have to have recovered for a relatively stable period of time. And after 3 months, it varies between 3 months to up to actually a few years. And the size of the lesion, yes, it's different because as you can probably see from the graph, because the frontal lobe is bigger, right? So the VMPFC is bigger, so the lesions are usually larger compared to the insular lesions. Yeah.
I guess
We-
what I'm wondering, and maybe this is both of you, is,
Yeah.
is really the degree that a tumor in that area versus any lesion in that area may have a differential effect. And so, in other words, can I think
Yeah.
about the lesion by virtue of the resection resulting in the tumor as a lesion? If you were to do this in animal in the lab, you just go in and lesion that area and have a tumor. Or am I also thinking about the effects of the tumor
Yeah.
on the peritumoral area and surrounding tissue as when I think about what's going on?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. My intuition would be that I don't think any kind of lesion, I don't think the type of lesion should matter. I think as long as they have a hole in that part of the brain, because people have actually used stroke patients, for example. Yeah, in other studies. Similar studies, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So location of stroke would
It's the-
replicate some of this.
Yes, it's the location of the, yeah. Because also these are post, right? Obviously tumor always has, have brain cancer always have impact on cognition, but we think these are like clean patients in the sense that there is no, it's a usually very successful surgery, they have no other symptoms afterwards.
And just one last part of it.
Sure.
Do these patients all have chemotherapy of some type as well, or not?
That, I'm not sure.
Most of them patients are suffer from the low-grade gliomas, so they didn't suffer from the chemotherapy or the radiotherapy. Even exactly 3 months post-operatively. So whether we will give them this chemotherapy or radiotherapy depends on its pathology result. Right? So the low-grade and the total removal of the tumors, the patients do not have to
Okay.
suffer this kind of condition.
Yeah, I was just wondering about the so-called chemo brain.
Yeah.
Yes.
Whether there could be any effect of that treatment on this particular type of behavior.
So mostly it's from the low-grade.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, let's move on. All right, okay, so here comes the math part, right? So we used kind of a modified version of what's called the Schmidt utility function, okay, to define how subjects actually process these value signals, okay? So just very quickly, here S stands for the offer, right? So let's imagine if I get $5, but I actually expect something much nicer. It's $8, okay? My subjective utility is actually not $5, right? Because I kind of feel hurt by the fact that you're not giving me what I expect, right? So this is captured by this term. So this is what we call the internal norm, or what I really expected, okay? What we call the norm. So that difference between what I expected versus what I actually got is the norm prediction error signal. And I do feel that my subjective utility is actually discounted by this fact. So we have to take away this fact, this term, okay? And so this is the norm prediction error, okay? So the difference between my expectation and the actual offer. And we also add a sort of a discounting parameter, or what we call sensitivity to norm prediction errors to this, right? Because some people might put a lot of weight on this prediction error, but some might not, okay? And so it's the offer minus this term, okay? That's the basic. And we use the same utility function combined with different learning rules in our model, and we ended up with 5 different computational models. So here I have a baseline model. It's just this utility. So the Fair-Schmidt, it's not really Fair-Schmidt, but we call it Fair-Schmidt FS without learning, okay? And then we also have either a Bayesian or a Raskolo-Wagner updating rule, okay? And for each of these 2 classes of models, we either fix or we actually estimate the subject's starting point, right? So you could imagine maybe everyone started with, I don't know, 5 or 10, thinking that 5 or 10 is fair. But you could also assume that subjects have different starting points, right? And you can just directly estimate that point. So that's 2 by 2, 4 plus the no learning model. That's a total of 5 models. And what we do is typically in computational modeling is you do a model comparison. So basically you let the data speak for itself. And we did that for each group separately and also all together overall. And consistently we found that the RW, so the Raskolo-Wagner model, which is a basic type of reinforcement learning model, with the variable initial norm, okay, the initial starting point, is the best one. So here, this is the BIC score, and the lower the better, okay? So across all groups and also overall, if we estimate everyone together, we found that the Raskolo-Wagner learning rule plus variable individual starting points turns out to be the best model, okay? And then the next thing we did is just very simple. We did this. We just extracted all the parameters from our computational model, okay? And what we found the most interesting is that insular patients seem to have reduced learning rate, okay? So the adaptation rate is significantly reduced in this insular group. So each bar is the individual subject, okay? And so this is my normal controls, brain damage controls very nicely. There's no difference between brain damage controls and normal controls. But if you look at the insular group, there are, other than this one patient, everyone else is really had very little or very slow learning, okay? Whereas the VMPFC group is the opposite, right? So VMPFC patients actually had, if you may call hyper learning, so they adapted very fast. But this estimate is because, this pattern is because that insular VMPFC patients, cannot evaluate the offers in the first place. So their evaluation was already impaired. So and we didn't want to sort of put too much interpretation on this group, right? Rather than we focus on this one. So this is a much more reliable estimate. Okay. So very quickly, let's sum up what we found in this study. Yes?
Sorry, the last line.
Uh-huh.
How does the sensitivity work?
There was, I didn't show it here, but we didn't find any deficit in the insular group. Yeah.
So the sensitivity was same for insula versus the VMPFC?
Yes, the alpha. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so that was really a very simple study because it's just behavior, but we did find, the double dissociation we wanted, right? So the insular patients really had difficulty in adapting. So they adapted very slowly to the social norm, whereas my VMPFC patients had deficits in evaluation per se to start with, okay? And what we could not really conclude from the study was that whether deficits were in learning per se, or was it rather that they're bad at information binding. By that I mean integrating information from the body, so interoceptive states or physiological signals with learning. So me and a few colleagues have proposed a model that suggests the insula is a key region in binding information from external sources with your bodily signals. And we know that when you're in a sort of aversive environment, you should have physiological signals to sort of alert you to adapt your behavior, right? But these are open questions for future research. Okay, so that's my study one, okay? And from this study, what I had as a follow-up question was that how about individual influences on norms? So are we always just learning to adapt to social norms? What if we can change the direction? So we talked about how we should move our own estimate to match with the social norm. Oops, but is it possible at all to actually move the norm closer to us, right? Because that's how actually you can make things happen in your life, to change your environment, to change the society or the group around you, okay? And the answer is, it depends, okay? So this is actually, I'm into politics, but this is also how we actually got the idea to start this second study, okay? So I'm sure people have, heard about this. This was earlier this year, happened in Berkeley, when a right-wing writer, Milo Yiannopoulos, was invited to speak at Berkeley, which is the center of liberty and freedom and all that. And obviously the students had this huge riot, and they eventually actually canceled the talk, right? So in some cultures, some societies, when you start to protest, when you signal to the society, actually, it sort of echoes back. However, it's not always the case, right? So the next picture I'm going to show you, this is also, most of you probably know, about the Tiananmen Square event. So that was 1989 in Beijing. So this is what happened, right? So there were, hundreds of thousands of students and workers that went to the street to protest, but essentially corruption of the Chinese government. But eventually they, did not succeed, right? Even given such a strong force, and there's blood involved, there's a lot of violence involved, nothing really happened after that, right? So yes, as human beings, we have our willpower. We can change our actions to also change the environment around us, but to what degree really depends on the society and, of course, many other factors, okay? So this is actually really what inspired us to do this study. And we wanted to really see if we can simulate these situations in a lab, okay? And we came up with this paradigm, okay, what I call changing norms. And it's still based on the basic structure of the automating game. So it's very simple. You still play with, on each trial you play with a different person, okay? But we add a cover story, and we just tell them they're playing with partners from different teams, okay? And players in different teams might respond differently to my actions or to my rejection or acceptance behavior, okay? And the key manipulation is here. So the offers always start at 5, okay, for both what we call the in control versus the no control condition. So this is the in control condition. Offer starts at 5, but if you accept the offer, then what you're signaling is that I'm okay. I'm kind of like a cheap person, okay? I'll be happy to accept 5. Maybe if you give me 4, I'm okay too. So when you start to accept, your partner will really try to test your threshold, and they start to drop the offer. Okay? So if you accept, your next offer can decrease by either 0, 1, or 2. Okay? So on average, it's a minus. If you start to accept offers, your offer starts to go down. Okay? But if you start to reject offers, then you are signaling to your partner that you're not happy about the offer, right? What they should do is to increase the offer for you to accept. So when you start to reject, the offer goes up by either 0 or 1 or 2. Okay? So on average, it's an increase. This is the key manipulations here. And then we tell them that each group of people might respond differently to your actions. Okay? They also rate their emotions for 60% of the trials, and we ask them how much influence they think that they have on their partners. So that's what we call perceived control. And interestingly, okay, participants almost all learned to change the norms, or they almost always learned to up the offers. Okay? So this is the trajectory of the actual offers they received. Okay? In the control in the baseline condition, what's no control, meaning that the offers are just pre-generated and randomized. It stays about the same, right? Around 5. But for the in-control condition, they very nicely push the offers up gradually. Okay? It never really goes up all the way. And if we plot out the average of these two, so each dot here is an individual subject, you can see that in the in-control condition, subjects were really able to receive higher offers. But there's a huge variety, right? So some people are really good at doing this, some are really bad at doing that, right? So I wonder what these people are thinking, right? Because obviously they should at least do around 5 if they figure it out. Yeah.
In this game, if you reject, do both players lose the offer, or do you
Yeah.
have to get it's the same?
Yeah, it's the same rule, yeah.
So what about earnings, overall earnings in the game?
Yeah. We looked at that. Obviously, but the earnings is tricky because we still just randomly draw one round from all the offers they have received. And I have to look at that. We could calculate the total amount of earnings there. So just the offers they received looks like this, right? But because the actual rewards, the bonus point they have, is just a random draw from all the trials. So they don't, it's not very meaningful in that sense. Okay. And we also look at the reaction time, or the time it took for them to decide what to do. And again, very interestingly, in the in-control condition, people took longer, right? So basically, when they sense that there is something they can do to change the environment, they start to use deliberation, and they probably are strategizing. That's why the reaction time is a little longer for the in-control condition. Okay? And remember, we asked them to rate how much influence they think they had on the partner. And this is the result of the perceived control. Okay? So again, you can see there's a pretty wide range of intersubject variability. But on average, people felt they had stronger control or more control in the in-control condition compared to the no-control condition, right? But again, you have some individuals that really felt that they had little control even when they had control, right? Whereas here, when you have no control, this is what I call the illusion of control, right? you really have no control. You can't change the your partner's offer. But these individuals felt they had very strong control. Okay? Yeah.
But on the response numbers, are those seconds?
Yes, seconds. Yeah.
So I'm just curious about the interpretation of the slightly longer time, other than
Yeah.
thinking about it more. Is it perhaps strategy of delay being interposed
Yes.
to affect the outcome
Yeah.
versus spending more time
Yeah.
calculating.
Exactly.
It is a calculated, intentional
Yeah.
increased delay.
Yeah.
Is that it?
Yes, yeah, that's what we think, right? You can imagine if you're in a situation where you know you have no control, you're almost hopeless. You just respond, right? Whereas if you know you can actually actively change your partner's behavior, then you really have to think about what you should do.
You think people
Yeah.
were conscious of it if you were to test them and ask them if they knew
Mm-hmm.
they were taking a longer time?
We didn't ask why they think they took a longer time, but this is a self-report. So this is what they think they have, the amount of control they have on the partner. Yeah.
What about the correlation between the two? I think that would answer your question, right? Where people who perceived they were in control took longer.
That's a great point. Yeah, we need to check that. Yeah, it's still work in progress. So I really welcome any
But this is a
comment.
tenth of a second difference.
Yeah, it's a tiny, the effect size is really small. There's a question.
Is there, have you looked at the correlation between perceived control and like mean how offer size?
There is,
Are the ones that were getting lower than 5 the ones that also feel they're not?
there's no, yeah.
No.
Yeah, so it's actually really interesting, right? What you perceive, what kind of power or influence you perceive to have is actually uncorrelated with what you actually, the actual power you have, which kind of captures what's going on in our society. So this measure is quite interesting, and we're doing now this second level, sort of, correlational with also neural measures. Yeah. Okay. So so obviously we also look at the rejection rate, right? So overall there is no difference, okay, which is interesting. But if you again divide up by offer size, if we beam them into low, medium, and high offers, what you do see is that there is no difference for the low offers, but for the medium to high offers, we rejected more. People rejected more in the in-control condition, which makes sense, right? Because that's how they got to push the offers up. Right? You have to reject relatively high offers in order to increase future offers. So they learned that. So again, this is not really surprising to us. Okay, so now we have to sort of dig down the mechanism. So what is the neural and the computational mechanism that underlie these behaviors? Okay, so how do people do? How do they actually change norms? Again, if I bring out my game here, if you are just sort of mindlessly playing an individual, you just think, oh, how do I respond to each trial, right? But when you are thinking about changing future offers, what you should really do is to sort of form a mental tree. You have to simulate what's going to happen in the next step, at least, right? So you're not just thinking about this partner, you're also thinking about what happens with this partner right here, okay? And maybe you have to do that even for a few more steps, yeah.
Do the participants know how many iterations of the game they're going to play?
They do, yeah. So they have 40 trials per condition. We don't really show the trial number on the screen, but I don't know if they can keep track of 40 trials in total. It's probably difficult. I don't think they really have the time or the resources to do the counting, but they know before the experiment that there are 40 in each condition. Yeah.
You think if they just had a couple of trials, it would make sense to always accept. But if you had time. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
That's what
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. So again, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with this line of work. So it really started by Nathaniel Dahl at Princeton, who was at UCL when he conducted this study, right? And so there's now a whole industry in decision-making and neuroeconomics that examines how people conduct what's called model-based behaviors, okay? Meaning that I don't just simply respond to your behavior at the current moment. I really have to think about the future, right? I have to project myself to see what this trial or this moment, has to do with the next moment and the next moment, okay? So sort of tree-based planning or model-based planning, okay? So this is a very famous paradigm used in the so-called model-based, model-free type of behaviors. It's called a two-step task, in which when you see these cues, you don't just get a reward or a punishment immediately, but it just transitions you to a second level cue. And then from there, you either get a reward or punishment. So meaning that when you're processing these cues, you really have to think about what's coming up next, right? So that simulates learning, okay? And what they found is that both model-based and the model-free learning are encoded in the ventral striatum area, okay? Again, not really surprising, okay? So sort of leaning on this framework or these ideas, what we did is we came up with a new model. It's not exactly what Nathaniel used in his studies, but it's, it's similar in concept. So here's our old utility function, right? So remember this, I have my utility, it's the offer, but penalized by this norm prediction error term, okay? And what we did, this is in collaboration with Dongyou, is that we added a new term here, okay? So this is what we call the planning term, okay? And here we have two new parameters. One is a discount rate, okay, eta, and then this parameter, delta here, which represents the amount of subjective control, okay? Let me rewrite this for you because this is really almost impossible to understand, right? Okay, if I rewrite this, this is really just about the utility if I accept the current offer versus if I reject the current offer, right? So again, think about the consequence of accepting or rejecting right now. Obviously, I have my current value, my current utility here, but if I accept, let's say, I know that my offer is going to drop, right? So the next offer will be S minus this drop, okay? And again, penalized by a prediction error term. So this is really exactly the same as what's going on in the current trial. The only difference is that here we are, because we're changing the offers, right? So there is a delta here, okay? And it's the same if it's reject. And if you rewrite this, I promise you'll get this. But we can do that exercise at home. So here we have two new parameters, the discount rate and eta, and also the delta term, okay? Okay, so this gives us actually now 10 models, right? So we have with planning, a class of models with planning. These are my new models. And also my old models of no planning. So these 5 are just what I used before in the first study, okay? But now I double it because now with every combination, I can add a planning term, okay? So in total, I have 10 models here, okay? And we estimated the in control and the no control separately, okay? And this is very interesting. So in the in control condition, the winning model is the R stands for Raskola. So it should be, this is the Raskola-Wagner model, okay, with planning and with variable initial norm, okay. Whereas in the no control condition, our best winning model is actually the same basic model, but without planning, okay. So the key difference here is really the planning part, right? So to me, it's interesting because it sounds like subjects are just using completely different cognitive structures when they are trying to solve these two problems, right? So when you are in the environment where you know you cannot change, they learned that over the trials, they learned that they cannot exert their influence on the environment. They basically just use a very simple model without planning. They just think about what's going on right now, okay? But when they sense there is a chance for them to influence their partner, they start to incorporate planning, right? So that's the key difference between these two cognitive models. Okay. So we have all the parameter estimates too for the two conditions. But because they are from two different models, it's hard to compare them directly. So, but we still list them. Okay. So this is the same problem we have for neural models like dynamic causal modeling, right? So when you end up with two different structures, two completely different models for two conditions, then people just basically stop there and they don't go ahead and compare the parameters because really it doesn't make much sense, right? But the interesting part is the different structures of the models. Okay, so what we did next is obviously our fMRI analysis. We looked at how subjects encoded both future and current values, right? So remember, in our utility function, there's the first line that represents what's going on in the current trial. That's the value I'm calculating right now, versus the value I'm calculating for the next trial. Okay, so we see a couple of regions that showed common activation, including the ventral striatum, which is very nice. Okay, the ventral striatum encoded both current and future values. Same for amygdala, so it's slightly different parts of the amygdala, but see this yellow and the pink cluster here, but they're both in the amygdala. So both the amygdala and ventral striatum encoded current and future current and future values. Okay, and for the insula, interestingly, we only see its activation by current offers or current values, but not future value. Okay, we also compared the same parameter, right? So current value from the in control condition or the no control condition. And we also see nice VMPFC activation in both. So this really confirms all the previous studies that shows VMPFC is involved in value encoding, right, or utility encoding. But interestingly, the VMPFC does not show up for future value. Yeah. Okay, and then my very hardworking student did this nice connectivity analysis. So we used VMPFC as a seed to correlate with whole brain activity, right? Modulated by either current or future value, this time only in the in-control condition. And across both conditions, we see increased connectivity between ventral striatum and the post-cingulate cortex, or the PCC. Okay? So this is a little interesting for me because I personally know very little about the PCC. And I looked up in the literature. So it turns out that the PCC is mostly considered to be part of this default mode network. And it's hypothesized to be important in attention. So when you direct your attention to something, you will see the PCC. Okay? But it turns out in the decision-making literature, there's also now increased attention paid to the PCC. So there are a couple of pretty high-profile papers from Michael Plath's lab at Duke, but now he's at UPenn, yeah, where they showed that there are these risk-sensitive neurons and also reward neurons located in the PCC, in the post-cingulate cortex. And they, and then Paul Glimcher's lab has found that the PCC is also involved in temporal discounting. Yeah, so it's involved in delayed rewards. So that is nice. So we can come up with our story as to why the PCC is involved in both current and future values. Okay, interim summary. I think I have 5-10 minutes left. So from the second study, we showed that people actually use different structures of cognitive models or models of different structures when they are given control compared to when they have no control. Okay? And we found a bunch of regions that showed up for this cognitive process. Okay, so let me quickly switch to my last bit of the data. This is also ongoing process. So this is the social exchange battery from London, where we looked at borderline personality disorders, right? So does anyone know who this is? So, not really, okay. No one watches Saturday Night Live. So this is an actor named Pete Davidson from SNL, and he was recently diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. Yeah, so it's actually more common than we think. And I think especially among artists, like, actors, actresses. Anyway, it is a very devastating disorder because they usually cannot really keep their social relationships, right? So because they have these huge mood swings and also impulsive behaviors, it's very hard for them to keep a normal social relationship, okay? That's handy for us because that means they have social deficits, right? So the paradigm we used is, again, slightly different from what I used before. So this is the real social norm paradigm in which we sort of start them with like an average offer of 8. So this is what we call the medium condition. And then the offer either goes up to 12 or goes down to 4. So this is median, high median, and then median, low median, okay? And sorry, it's missing here, but median, high median, median, low median, okay? So we've used this paradigm to test many BPD patients and also controls. And this is just the data I got until I basically left London. And we had 137 BPD patients and 84 controls, right? So, and for the fMRI, we have around 50 for each group. Okay, I think the number has gone up a lot more now. So, okay, so let's look at adaptation rate. Okay, the acceptance rate. Okay, so we divide up the 4 groups. So median, high median, median, high median, BPD versus healthy control. There's nothing that really stands out, right? So, acceptance rate goes up, obviously, when the offer goes up, and it goes down. This is median, low median, median, low median here. And it goes down when the offer drops, okay? So that's, again, not surprising, but we don't see any meaningful group difference, okay? So that's disappointing. This is, after all these years of effort recruiting hundreds of patients, that's not something you wish to see, right? But thanks to our modeling, which can really help us uncover extract some deeper parameters, let's see if it works with this population, okay? We did the same models. So this is just the basic no planning model that we used for the first study, right? So we have 5 models, fair Schmidt, no learning, and we have Bayesian, 2 Bayesian models and 2 Raskilo-Wagner models. But again, see, magically, we still have the Raskilo-Wagner model with variable initial norm as the winning model across all of them, okay? That's very reassuring, right? So this model always wins. And if we, separate them by the condition, that's the same, okay? Very reassuring. When we extract the parameters, the only thing that we found that showed a very slight difference, so there's a trend, I think the p-value is 0.6 or 0.6 or 0.7, something like that, is in the initial norm. Okay, so here the red one is these BPD patients, and the blue is the non-clinical or the healthy controls. Okay, so what you see is that there's slightly higher expectation of the first norm. So they're prior, so-called, okay? The prior is greater. So they basically came to the lab expecting to receive more than healthy controls, okay? So they're demanding people. But
is this the end where you had a whole lot more BPD patients before you put them in the scanners? So you're just showing us number of subjects, not the percent of subjects
No.
accepted.
Yeah, but
So
if
you
you
have
if you look at
more.
the percent is also higher. Yes, we do have more, but the percent is higher. If you see, right? Because for example, this bar, this is the highest for the BPD patients, but for for healthy controls, you don't really see that much of a difference across different expectations.
But with such different ends. it's
Yeah,
hard to
yeah,
read.
yeah. Okay. So yeah, so these are the actual numbers. Again, it's not a huge effect size, right? That's so for the initial norm, that's the only thing we found a trend in group difference. And the interesting part is that wait, I forgot. Okay, anyway, doesn't matter. So this is a trend difference. Okay, so the BPD patients just have a slightly higher expectation to start with than the healthy controls. Okay. Okay, and there's a lot more interesting results for the neural part. Okay, so for example, there's actually reduced neural activations in response to value signals. So this is basically the same current value signal, and across the whole brain, we found that BPD patients have reduced activations in the insula when they're encoding this value signal, and also the ACC, right? And if you decompose this signal by group, there was no difference in the median, high median group, okay? And the difference is really driven by the median, low median group, right? So that kind of makes sense to me. I'll try to make this make sense to you in the sense that when you start with median, it is much more difficult to go lower than to go higher, right? If I go higher, I don't really think that's a big deal. But when I go lower, when the offers start to go lower, you know, you have to work hard to process that signal. So that's the case for healthy controls. But the BPD patients don't seem to have that signal here. Okay. So that's number one. And it's the same for ACC and insula. Okay. Number two is that we also looked at norm prediction errors. But interestingly, we don't really see, again, it's a trend. It seems like there's going to be something, but we don't really see statistical difference in the, you know, either the VMPFC or the striatum. Okay, okay, should be my last slide. And for emotional processing, remember we also asked them to rate how they feel about each trial for 60% of the trials. Okay, for emotional processing, it's the other way around. Okay, so now we actually see more activations in the insula in BPD patients compared to healthy controls. And again, this is driven by the median, low median condition, right? So you can imagine that when normal controls observe a sudden drop in the signal, they're like, oh, I can process that. It'll cost me some cognitive resources to process that, but I can process it. I don't feel like particularly furious about it. But for BPD patients, cognitively they really cannot, either process that or adapt to that. But emotionally, they are super aroused, right? They think that's really bad. It's really unfair, right? When you suddenly treat me very badly compared to the starting point, okay? So these kind of match with the, clinical impression of BPD. Yes?
I'm not sure if you do this, but what you're saying is that when they have that drop-off, there's a big emotional reaction potentially here. That's what you think. Does that continue to carry over to when they get back up to the median? Like, does that just continue through the rest of the task? Are you able to tell that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we haven't looked at that. I think that would be something very interesting to look at, right? If we can actually separate these into the different conditions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Emotional, does it just like,
Yes,
does it get
but
worse, or is it
I think if I were to use maybe Brooks' result from the science paper, I would guess they are not able to come back, right? Right. That's also a signature. They cannot really repair already ruptured relationships. Yeah. Okay. All right. Right on time. So my summary slide, and I really just want to add this last message that. Through this series of studies, we think we know how to learn, how people learn to adapt to norms, but also how they change norms. And importantly, we think these mechanisms and paradigms are important for something like computational psychiatry, right, in which we're really trying to get to the mechanism. And BPD is one example, but we can easily think of a few other clinical examples with such impaired norm processing. Okay, and this is my real last slide. So I want to thank my lab and especially my PhD student, Suzhong Na, who is the lead author on this paper, and collaborators across the globe. But for this particular project, Dong Yo and Andreas Hula, who have provided a lot of invaluable inputs on the modeling part. And of course, Terry and Reed and Xin Chao here for their guidance on other projects. Okay, and currently funded by UT Dallas and also the Dallas Foundation, which is a very mysterious foundation. I've never met anyone from there. They just decided to give me some money. And yeah, thank you all for your attention. Yeah.
So if the behavior of the BPD patients is the same, but the neural networks are different, what do you think is compensating that's allowing them to recover behavior?
Yeah, we've been talking about that for the past 2 years, actually. And actually, I think we did another round of analysis with some additional patients. It looks like the same pattern. And if you have 100 patients, you still don't see a difference in behavior. You're not going to see it, right? But the neural difference is quite strong, right? So we can set the threshold much higher. You can still see that. Long story short, I think that these are relatively high-functioning individuals, right? Still, many of them actually still hold jobs. I mean, they can still maybe like very low SES jobs, but they can, they don't have to be hospitalized. They can still understand basic, environments and what's expected from them. So behaviorally, they almost act as the same as healthy controls, right? But they probably just internalized all that, right? So you can imagine someone's brain is probably firing like crazy, but somehow they manage to express the same behavior. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
To that very point, the matching of borderline personality patients and controls would seem to be a very demanding task.
Yeah.
If the borderline patients have poor social relations, that might stand for any number of other things, low levels of employment, low levels of education. Mm. How do you deal with that when you choose the control participant?
Yes, yeah. Actually, that's a very good point. For a lot of these studies, I'm sure you are all aware, either for BPD or addiction, a lot of these patient groups it's actually more difficult to recruit healthy controls than patients, right? Because to find completely matched participants is almost impossible. For this particular study, we did match for at least, let's say, age, gender. We have measurements of socioeconomic status. So we always tried to find relatively low income, low status healthy controls to find. Yeah, it's difficult. That's why we actually have less healthy controls than patients. But I don't think we can ever match them completely, right? For example, the social deficit part is the part we're interested in. I don't think it would make sense to match them, all right? Let's say if some healthy controls have these problems, then they're probably not really healthy controls. Yeah, but I think that's a realistic challenge that we all face in neuropsychiatry research. So we do the best we can. We match these basic biological variables. Yeah.
One implication of the attitude of matching would be not very successful in life in general, social relationships and all that that stands for, don't have a very good history of being able to anticipate things. And so in some of the tasks where not only is memory highly central to performing it over, let's say, the 40 trials, but being able to anticipate what the partner might do next is a relatively complex task cognitively.
Yes.
And so I'm just
Yeah.
curious
Yes.
as to how you might be able to take that into account as you offer an explanation that seems to be primarily based on a personality difference.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with everything you just said, and I want to. I want. No, I want to comment on one thing: the working memory problem. Right. So a lot of these decision-making tasks involve really high level of cognitive resource. Right. If someone has cognitive deficits to start with, like working memory deficit, they really won't be able to do any of it, and their behavior might be seen as something that looks like what we presented, but it could be due to something else. So that is actually the next step for us. So there is a researcher at UC Berkeley, so Ann Collins. She has developed a model that incorporated working memory actually in these decision processes. And her main population is schizophrenia. So before her work, everyone thought, schizophrenics they're not really sensitive to rewards, right? They have all sorts of problems with rewards and decision making. But after her model, basically her main contribution is to find out that these deficits are actually due to working memory. So if you have a model that incorporates a component for working memory, then the deficit is taken away by that, meaning that actually they just have working memory deficits to start with. But then their behavior expresses itself as if they're not sensitive to rewards. So that's exactly what you just said, yes. And I think that's the sort of the trend or the direction for the whole neuroeconomics community is to really start to incorporate these components, these basic cognitive components in our models. Right? So we're planning to do that, as a second step. Yeah. Thank you.
Nice.
Thank you. Thank you.